SpaceX may be preparing to make one of the most consequential strategic shifts in the history of commercial spaceflight. A new report says satellite operators are struggling to buy Falcon launches after 2028, and one unnamed source claims SpaceX intends to stop selling commercial Falcon missions after that year while continuing a limited number of federal flights. That claim is explosive. It is also not an official SpaceX announcement. So the first rule of this episode is simple. Do not confuse an anonymously sourced report with a confirmed corporate decision. But do not dismiss the report either. SpaceX's own investor documents describe a direction that points toward the same pressure. The company says Falcon 9 launch activity should decrease over time as its primary production and development resources shift towards Starship. Its internal payloads already dominate Falcon's workload, and Starlink now generates recurring revenue on a scale that makes a one-time launch sale look strategically smaller. This is not merely a story about retiring a famous rocket. It is a story about vertical integration, scarcity, pricing power, and whether the world's most productive launch provider may decide that its most valuable customer is itself. Today, we will separate the report from the confirmed facts, calculate how internal missions changed Falcon's economics, examine the alternatives available to satellite operators, and identify what this could mean for SpaceX investors. The report, published by Ars Technica on August 17th, describes a launch market that looks busy on paper, but increasingly constrained in practice. Commercial satellite companies are reportedly finding it difficult to secure Falcon capacity after 2028. The article cites one source who says SpaceX told the United States government that commercial Falcon missions could end after that year, with a smaller number of federal flights continuing. There are 3 reasons to handle that carefully. First, SpaceX has not issued a public cutoff date. Second, a sales constraint is not necessarily the same as a final retirement plan. SpaceX could be protecting capacity while Starship's schedule remains uncertain. Third, a date discussed with customers or the government can move when technical, regulatory, or market conditions change. The confirmed statement is broader. In its investor filing, SpaceX says Falcon 9 launch activity is expected to decline over time while production and development resources move toward Starship. That does not prove a 2028 cutoff, but it tells us the Falcon-to-Starship transition is real. The distinction matters because there are at least 4 possible outcomes. SpaceX could stop accepting ordinary commercial missions after 2028. It could keep Falcon available only for payloads that cannot yet move to Starship. It could preserve NASA and national security missions while reducing private sales. Or it could extend Falcon if Starship's ramp takes longer than planned. The market is reacting not to certainty, but to the possibility that its most reliable source of launch capacity may become less available. The most revealing numbers come from SpaceX itself. In 2025, Falcon 9 flew 165 times. Only 43 of those launches carried customer missions. The remaining 122 were internal missions, dominated by SpaceX's own satellite programs. Payload mass makes the imbalance even clearer. SpaceX says Falcon delivered 2,213 metric tons to orbit during 2025. Internal payloads accounted for 1,901 tons. Customer payloads accounted for 312. In other words, approximately 86% of the mass was internal. This changes how investors should think about Falcon. It still sells launch services, but it also functions as the logistics network for SpaceX's higher-value operating businesses. Every Starlink launch adds infrastructure that can produce subscription revenue for years. A customer launch produces a contract payment, but the payload belongs to somebody else. The 2026 pattern appears even more concentrated. Reuters calculated that Starlink represented roughly 79% of SpaceX missions so far this year. That does not mean customer launches are unprofitable. It means the opportunity cost of a launch slot is changing. If one Falcon mission can either deploy another company's satellite or expand SpaceX's own connectivity network, management must compare a one-time launch margin with the lifetime value of internal capacity. As Starlink grows, the internal option can become more attractive. And when the same company controls the rocket, satellites, terminals, software, network operations, and customer relationship, it captures value at every layer. Falcon's success may therefore be creating the conditions for SpaceX to sell fewer Falcon launches, not more. SpaceX's second quarter results explain why this trade-off matters. The company reported approximately $7.8 billion of quarterly revenue, including about $4.3 billion from connectivity. Starlink is no longer a side business that needs spare rocket capacity. It is one of the economic centers of the company. Launch services and connectivity also scale differently. A commercial launch contract ends after the payload is delivered and the service obligations are completed. A successful Starlink deployment can support consumer, enterprise, aviation, maritime, mobile, and government revenue month after month. The satellite still requires capital, ground infrastructure, spectrum, operations, and customer support, but it can create a recurring stream rather than a single transaction. Now add Starship. SpaceX describes Starship as central to its vertically integrated growth plan. The current V3 design is intended to carry around 100 metric tons to orbit in a fully reusable configuration, and future versions could be larger. For Starlink V3, SpaceX says a single Starship could eventually deploy dramatically more network capacity than a Falcon 9 mission. If Starship works at high cadence, SpaceX no longer needs Falcon to carry the same internal volume. But that does not automatically return Falcon slots to commercial customers. The company may reduce Falcon production, transfer engineering teams, repurpose launch infrastructure, and concentrate its future around Starship. That is the strategic pivot. Falcon optimized access to orbit. Starship is intended to industrialize it. A company preparing for that transition may not want to sign a long queue of commercial Falcon contracts that extend far into the next decade. If SpaceX reduces commercial availability, why not move the payload to another provider? Because launch capacity is not interchangeable. A satellite operator needs the right payload mass, fairing volume, target orbit, schedule, integration process, insurance profile, regulatory path, and price. A vehicle that exists on a sales presentation is not the same as a flight-proven rocket with an open slot. Ariane 6 is ramping up and has flown multiple Amazon LEO deployment missions in 2026. That is meaningful new capacity, especially for Europe. But its cadence is still small relative to Falcon's extraordinary operating tempo. Blue Origin's New Glenn is designed for large payloads and a reusable first stage. It has completed important missions, but a May hot fire anomaly damaged ground equipment and forced return to flight work. Blue Origin said in August that the issue traced to a main oxygen valve on a BE-4 engine and that mitigations were underway. The program can become a major alternative, but customers must evaluate current availability, not only eventual capability. Rocket Lab's Neutron is aimed at the medium lift market, but the company said a Stage 1 tank qualification failure affected its schedule. Vulcan, Ariane, New Glenn, Neutron, and other vehicles can absorb portions of demand, but none can instantly reproduce Falcon's combination of cadence, demonstrated reliability, payload flexibility, and launch infrastructure. That is why the market can experience a launch crunch during a period of record global launch activity. The missing product is not simply a rocket. It is a reliable, appropriately sized, competitively priced launch slot at the exact time a satellite program needs it. If the reported cutoff becomes real, the first consequence is likely pricing power for every credible alternative provider. Scarce launch slots become more valuable. Operators may sign earlier, accept less favorable schedules, redesign spacecraft for different rockets, or divide constellations across several vehicles. The second consequence is schedule risk. Satellites are built around financing plans, regulatory deadlines, service commitments, and replacement cycles. A one-year launch delay can postpone revenue, leave aging spacecraft in service, or threaten spectrum milestones. The launch price is only one part of the economic exposure. Third is competition policy. SpaceX launches satellites for companies that can compete with Starlink in connectivity, direct-to-phone service, Earth observation, and other markets. Restricting third-party capacity while prioritizing internal constellations could attract attention from governments and regulators, even if SpaceX is acting within its contracts and operational rights. Fourth is national resilience. NASA and defense missions may retain Falcon access, but a healthy commercial space economy also depends on diverse launch providers. If a single company carries a large share of Western launch demand, its vehicle transition becomes an industry-wide event. The fifth consequence is a possible opening for competitors. A shortage is an invitation. Blue Origin, ULA, Arianespace, Rocket Lab, and future providers do not need to match Falcon immediately to benefit. They need to offer dependable capacity that customers can actually book. SpaceX could strengthen its own vertical integration while simultaneously improving the business case for rival launch systems. For SpaceX investors, the bull case is straightforward. Management is allocating scarce engineering talent and launch capacity toward the businesses with the greatest long-term value. Falcon proved reusability and created the launch machine. Starlink converted that machine into recurring revenue. Starship is intended to multiply the amount of infrastructure SpaceX can place in orbit. Reducing lower priority customer work could accelerate the flywheel. The bull case also says Falcon's commercial success gave SpaceX strategic freedom. The company no longer needs to maximize external bookings merely to keep its launch line active. Internal demand can fill the manifest, and each mission can deepen a network moat. The bear case begins with transition risk. Falcon is operational today. Starship's fully reusable, high-cadence economics are still developing. If SpaceX reduces Falcon capacity before Starship becomes dependable, the company could create a gap that affects its own satellites, NASA obligations, customers, revenue, and reputation. There is also concentration risk. Starship is expected to support Starlink V3, mobile connectivity, lunar missions, future large payloads, and potentially orbital computing. A delay in one launch system can propagate across several growth engines. Finally, walking away from commercial customers can be difficult to reverse. Satellite manufacturers and operators will redesign missions, sign multi-launch agreements elsewhere, and support competing rockets. SpaceX may gain focus, but it could also help finance the alternatives that reduce its launch dominance later. The correct investor conclusion is not that fewer customer launches are automatically good or bad. The question is whether the value created by internal payloads exceeds the revenue, relationships, resilience, and market influence SpaceX gives up. Watch 5 signals from here. First, the post-2028 commercial manifest. Confirmed customer contracts are more important than rumors. If new private missions continue appearing in 2029 and beyond, the reported cutoff may be flexible or incomplete. Second, formal language from SpaceX. Listen for a public Falcon lifecycle plan, not merely a statement that cadence will decline. Third, Starship operations. The transition becomes credible when Starship delivers payloads repeatedly, recovers its upper stage, measures refurbishment time, and demonstrates genuine reflight. Fourth, competitor cadence. New Glenn, Vulcan, Ariane 6, Neutron, and other vehicles must convert announced capacity into launches that customers can book with confidence. Fifth, SpaceX's segment economics. Investors should compare launch services revenue with the recurring revenue, margins, capital requirements, and customer growth produced by internal constellations. My verdict is that the exact 2028 cutoff remains unconfirmed, but the strategic direction is already visible. Falcon is evolving from the product SpaceX sells to the infrastructure SpaceX uses. Starship is supposed to take that logic to an industrial scale. If SpaceX can move internal volume to a rapidly reusable Starship without disrupting government obligations or creating an operational gap, prioritizing its own payloads may be one of the strongest expressions of vertical integration in modern industry. If Starship slips while Falcon availability shrinks, the same decision can expose transition risk across SpaceX and the entire Western launch market. The headline is not that Falcon 9 is definitely disappearing after 2028. The headline is that SpaceX may no longer need the commercial launch market as much as the commercial launch market needs SpaceX. Subscribe for the source documents, the operating numbers, and the distinction between what SpaceX has confirmed and what it still has to prove. This is SpaceXInvestor.